Phil fails at philosophy. What the heck could it be? Life such a mystery. Phil fails.
So we used to have, I think, a television tied to Austin Public.
Okay.
Like there used to be an ACC television station.
I know there's a studio there. Y'all
Right.
have a TV station there,
Right.
or like at least a...
And that was like a production studio that was developed to do distance learning before you really could do it all through Blackboard, through online video and stuff. So what they used to do in the early days, even with online classes, was you would take a class and you would know that the lecture was on television at 7 o'clock on Thursdays. But it was just broadcast, so anyone could watch the class.
Yeah.
And then all the other class stuff was done. Initially, I think that initially they set it up with like correspondence, pen and paper. And then it eventually evolved to like using, pretty early to using online platforms to like submit work, consume text, etc.
Yeah.
But that studio basically has always been there and has evolved to be, I don't know how to explain them. I mean, we have the monitors everywhere. We have monitors in the hallways everywhere.
Yeah,
And
they just have static images on them.
No, they produce a lot of like short, like 1 minute, 2 minute videos that really kind of just like feature different things that students are doing or feature different programs, or this is how you can connect with like the yoga classes at Highland, or this is, you know, where you can go to get study skills help. And they just sort of,
They're doing yoga classes now at ACC?
yeah, they have a pretty big mindfulness. We actually do have credit yoga programs too.
You can get a yoga certificate.
No, you can get a kinesiology certificate,
And yoga's a
and
part of
yoga is
it.
a part of that.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah. Although I did have a faculty a while back who wanted to see about developing a yoga associate's, like a yoga teacher trainee associate's degree. That
Well, I just said with the guest yesterday that in Austin, I believe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a guitar player.
right.
And now I think you can't throw a rock without hitting a yoga instructor.
Yeah, I think
Or a massage therapist, maybe.
I think her idea was interesting because her idea was to combine, like, partner with some yoga studios to get the sort of hours of instruction around.
Yeah,
yoga
because you need like
instruction.
2,000 hours or
Right.
something like that. Yeah.
And build that into the program, but then to use some of the credit classes with philosophy and whatnot to actually have a more in-depth exploration of the tradition, and then also include work with our business program and entrepreneurship to just basically help train you in like the basics of running a yoga business.
Yeah, the business part of it.
Or managing, because like often as a yoga teacher, and when I talk to them, when you're interacting with studios, you're often getting paid per student for the class that you're teaching. Like you're a contractor with the studio.
Yeah.
And so learning how to manage yourself as an independent contractor, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that like you got to figure out if you're going to have that lifestyle.
How do you get insurance? How do you... You probably want to develop your own studio as soon as possible, or at least have your own followers. You're developing an audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you might go to different places to do it.
Exactly.
I do yoga now pretty regularly.
Where are you going?
At Crux.
Crux, nice.
Crux is the gym that I've been doing the workout, the fitness, and the yoga up there pretty like multiple times a day.
Nice.
And I really like our trainers, our facilitators, or instructors.
Yeah, Crux seems like a good place. I've had other people I talk to who work out there and say it's a kind of solid gym in itself, and then you've got the climbing stuff, and
yeah, like I haven't really been doing as much climbing lately. I've just been doing strength and conditioning and the yoga classes, and I really recently started taking the handstanding class. They've kind of this where you can learn how to do handstands.
I should go check. We may even, there's a whole bunch of the businesses right around Highland offer significant discounts to ACC employees.
I have guest passes if you want to go check out.
I might take advantage of that.
Free. Yeah, you'd be welcome to come as my guest. Do a workout class or something.
Yeah, just kind of, I'm interested in the climbing wall for sure.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to climb.
And they have a bouldering.
It's bouldering.
It's just
only. at this one.
That's what I prefer.
At the Brutorium. They've got a new one in Pflugerville that has the like high walls and all that.
Yeah, I'm not as interested in the equipment-based climbing as I am in the bouldering.
Well, they've got bouldering. That's all they have here.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And then they have great fitness instructors and a gym, and then they have the yoga, and then there's a sauna in the men's group. There's a sauna. Yeah, I like it.
Oh man, it's just getting sold.
Yeah, they need a cold plunge.
Well, and it's like part of it is like it's right there.
It's right there
where I work.
Yeah, it's literally like right there.
It's so convenient.
So convenient.
You know.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started.
Let's get started.
Be out of here by like 10:50 to 11 because I got an appointment with my mother-in-law to our weekly like finance stuff. Ready?
Oh, we could do better than that. Yeah. Oh, we want to do? Welcome to Phails. Phails at Philosophy with Grant Potts. Wave at everybody. This is Philosophy Book Club.
Yeah.
And we're on the 8th question. Mm-hmm. What's the 8th question, Grant?
The 8th question is like, I can't remember how they.
It's like, should we solve climate change? Let me read it.
Right. But it's like
for future generations.
It's about what is our obligations to future generations? Like, it's an interesting question. Like you can think about obligations to each other, but do you have an obligation to like people who fundamentally don't exist yet?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Which is one of the problems that he brings up early on.
How do they do it here? Searching for the title. You'd think it'd be at the front, the table of contents. I have read books before. Oh my God, editor's introduction.
No, I think it's before the introduction.
Is it?
I think you just missed it. This is the best part of the podcast, by the way.
Dun 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 dun. Is it before the, yeah, here we go. What do we owe future generations? Compassion and future generations, a Buddhist contribution to an ethics of global interdependence. And this is Peter D. Hershock. Mm-hmm. The 8th question and final question.
I know.
8th and final question.
We're either going to have to like stop.
We'll pick another book.
Or
what do you
pick
mean
another
stop?
book.
Pick another book. Or we go through these. I think we could talk about this later. Like how do we continue? We could do that at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Philosophy's Big Questions, comparing Buddhist and Western approaches, edited by Stephen M. Emanuel. And we're on the 8th question.
Yeah.
Man, I haven't read philosophy in a minute because we've slowed down the cadence of these. And I think before when we were doing it maybe once every 2 weeks or more frequently, I got more accustomed to the thickness of these texts. Mm-hmm. What happens when I read these, what happened when I read this, is I feel the overwhelming feeling is anger. Yeah, it's anger. And then when I investigate that anger, because I know it's anger because I'm like, man, I'm trying to be all smart, right?
Right.
Why are they trying to just like...
I laugh because I recognize this response.
Oh, you have it too?
No.
Oh, you don't?
But my students do.
Yeah, of course they do. And so when I'm just like angry at like intellectualism and like, you know, academic elitism, and I get all this stuff that really is just a crust over a sadness or a feeling of insecurity or an inadequacy at reading it. Mm-hmm. I'm reading sentences over and over again, and I'm just like, I still don't know what that means. Some of that stuff I probably just haze over in my eyes and just like suffer through paragraphs where I don't ever understand what the heck they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And that happened with this chapter.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And I don't understand the winding road we got to whatever point is being made.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as a philosopher, he's working in a way that I think, yeah, it's going to be alienating to an audience who doesn't kind of know the larger framework in which he's operating, because he's making nods to those frameworks. He's introducing those frameworks, but he's not necessarily doing the work to explain the frameworks to you in a systematic way. He also, and you know, this is talking about it itself. Like we can think about the essay as a work of philosophy and whether a work of philosophy needs to be an argument. And there's kind of an argument here, but it's not like some of the other essays. And I think part of what's interesting about this book is you do get this very different set of ways to go about doing philosophy in terms of writing an essay. In this, that's what, like at the end. I like this book after going through it with you for a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons I like it is it's actually a really good kind of snapshot of different, it's not exhaustive, right? It's not like everything's represented.
Yeah.
But different ways that academic philosophers engage in their work.
Well, because we have 8 different authors, 8 different philosophers.
And the editor, sometimes though, when you get a volume like this, they're all coming from the same style of writing, the same style of philosophy. They're from a particular school that has developed a certain, and this is traversing a lot of different kinds of ways of going. So some of them are very clear, like here's an argument, here's the 3 points.
Traversing?
Yeah, like traveling across.
Traversing,
yeah. Traverse. Yeah, it's like pillow.
Yeah, this one traverses a bunch of different. Yeah, I agree. It angers me in 8 different ways.
Yeah. So it is like I when I was reading, I read it. I read that opening section, and then I got to.
Let's go through this.
Yeah,
I kind of have a.
Well, I want to finish.
Okay,
my reading.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I read the opening section, and just kind of. I went through the sources of resistance. It's pretty straightforward. The structural considerations. Okay. And then when I got to the case for compassion. I just lost the plot, right? The first time I was reading it.
Yeah.
And I was rereading that and going back because he's making this sort of like very nuanced argument about how we decide to understand compassion with another philosopher, Martha Nussbaum. And he's kind of presenting your ideas, but not full. And I just I couldn't track it. So I put it down, right? And it was just like after probably the 3rd time of rereading it, I just put it down.
Yeah.
And said, I need to take a break from this.
You couldn't track it.
Right.
I couldn't track it either.
So I came back the next day, and then the next day I kind of reviewed a little bit of the first thing, and then I had a lot easier time tracking what was going on here. Some of it's just exhaustion, right? The amount of
exhaustion
work you need to do going through.
Right. I needed to start this a month ago. I read it maybe twice.
Right.
All the way through. And both times probably glazed over and really wasn't able to grasp each section, which is why I wanted to kind of go section by section and take the winding road that Peter D. Hershock takes us through.
Yeah, I think that's basically what I did in the second read, that helped me kind of get my head around what he's doing. Because like what he's saying in a moment is not always clear to like what the larger arc of what he's trying to do here is, because it is a winding road.
It's a winding road.
Yeah.
So, I think it'll give us different things we could talk about along the way. And so I'll start with, he begins with this it's different now than it was back then. That's like the opening thing is like, it's different now. And he gives a lot of examples of how it's different. He talks about how in the 1900s, there were 224 million people. Mm-hmm. How the heck did they know how many people there were in 1900s? There's a good census, but whatever. There's about 224 people, and now there's 3.5 billion. And my thought.
Well, that's in 1900. There's 3.5.
No, and increase from 224 million people in 1900 to the current total of 3.5 billion.
Oh yeah. That.
And I just thought.
And that's the urban population. That's what he's talking about. Is like not the population of the world, but the population
only the urban
that lives in cities.
But this isn't going to work. We can't keep increasing at this rate and not exhaust every resource on this planet.
Well, that's his point, right? That's why he's saying that the situation is different, because he's saying like, I think part of what he's saying is like, look, this core question he asked, which is, I had it right in front of me. The way he phrases it, what duties do we have, if any, toward those who will live 50 to 100 years from now?
Well, there can't be as many as it can't keep growing at this level. And that be a question that can be answered. I just don't think.
I think more I mean, like, there's the question of like,
Even it's the how we live. If there's that many people, I don't think it matters how we live. It won't work. We just can't keep growing at that exponential rate.
see, this is what he's saying though. Like he's saying that's not true. Like he's saying our dilemma is coming from a situation where
countries can't work together because they've got.
We can recognize, like we recognize this problem that we have potentially an obligation to people 50 or 100 years from now.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing. And part of what he's saying is like in the past, that's been like we've had that question. We've brought it up. I think his end move shows how deeply we've brought it up. But we are faced with it at a scale and level we've never been faced with. It's a question we can't avoid now, I think, is one of the things he's saying is sort of how do we deal with this situation that's going to have this impact on our grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's one thing. But the second thing he's saying is, and we can dispute whether this is true or not, but he says we actually have the technical abilities to address global climate change, right? And he's, if we're looking at one thing, and that may be to some extent addressing population growth, but I think when I've looked at some of the wider literature around ethics of climate change, which is where I get into the climate science, the climate scientists don't see population in itself as the problem.
There's got to be a capacity on Earth.
And the other thing that you see is that population growth, although expanding, is slowing down with development. That as populations of humans undergo economic development, get access to birth control, go through, and you can discuss whether this is ideological modernization or technical.
People are having less kids.
People have and you get into the more developed a country, you begin to have countries that are actually facing economic problems of population decline,
like Japan.
Right. And so there is some sense to see that population problem itself as part of a larger set of problems, but that may have technical solutions. And so partly
that's the next one.
There's a technical solution, but it's a technical solution that is not merely a set of technical solutions, right? Because the technical solutions that I think are there for climate change, for example, are not, hey, if we build all these technical devices, we'll make it great. We just need to get everyone to adopt it. It actually does require people to recognize some sense of obligation to give up, right, for others.
So you're jumping way ahead to predicament. You're jumping to predicament.
Right, but I think that's part of what he's saying is like that's the opening. Is like this is new, and it's new because
we can't. Yeah, it sounds like a really great thing for a white man in America to say, "Hey, we've already taken advantage of fossil fuels, which are the primary causes for climate change for now multiple centuries," which they talk about in the book. Now we want you guys who haven't had that advantage to not take advantage of those.
Which I don't think he's saying, but he's saying
that is a really
because he brings that up.
I mean,
as
we
one
have
of the problems.
those are truths. Like America, the West got to fossil fuels first,
right?
And we realized the power of it. And now India, China, all of these countries didn't take advantage of those energy resources for a long time, and build all the industrial stuff. I mean, there's a whole nother question of like,
I mean, the leading fossil fuel consumers remain per capita us.
Really?
Yeah.
I think
it's not like like at the end of the day we can talk about that, but the reality is, if we were going to address it, if we were serious about addressing it as
it's us now
with the economic privilege,
they're rolling on.
Right, but they're rolling on.
China's rolling on. They're going to want to use these things to build and to grow the same way we did.
Yeah, but they're not the ones sitting and blocking the Paris Accords, right? They're actually, those economies are interested in figuring out how can we industrialize in a sustainable way and globally than the United States is, because the United States is so invested in its own sovereignty to not be told to control its resources by others. Right?
One thing, an aside here.
And that's partly just our sense of ourselves as like this isolated unit.
An aside here, real quick. I want to share this with you while we're together. One of our clips on TikTok.
Yeah,
I'm not going to watch
got
TikTok.
the person.
Got, let's see, where is it? 23,000 views. And it's the one where we're kind of arguing a little bit and getting kind of
Right,
excited.
good.
And so I think we need to argue and get exciting a little bit more.
Well, Phil, you're wrong.
I'm not wrong. It's clear from the metrics that when we do a little spicy thing, folks want to see that.
Yeah, no.
I just don't know how to do it.
You just let it emerge organically. What you need to do is just capture it into little videos.
Capture and snippets. Well, that's what I do.
Right.
TikTok really liked this one, 23,000 people. And of those, there's like tons of views, tons of like 356 comments,
That's great.
560 likes. And some of them are on my side, some of them are on your side, some of them are saying we're both idiots.
Right. Well, that's good. Exercising those.
I agree with,
Phil.
and I agree with about a third of them.
The ones that says we're both idiots.
Oh, the ones damn right. So, just keep that in your mind.
Right.
If I start arguing with you,
Well, and
I'm doing it for the engagement.
there's also a level at which, if our position is there's so many people we're helpless, then we just stop. Like there's no reason to go on.
You're saying it doesn't even, well, the technological problem changes. It changes to, hey, we need to manage population growth and manage our reproduction, but then we get into eugenics, and I think the wrong people did that
Right.
for us to get involved with it. Like the Nazis kind of ruined eugenics for anybody.
Right. And yes. And I think there's some root aspects to eugenics, which we could potentially
Well, let's start.
that like create ethical problems. But I think whatever the technical solution is, the problem he's saying is that technical solution, we're in a situation where that technical solution can't happen until we figure out how to get people to recognize their obligation.
Let's back up a little bit.
That's kind of the second one.
I've got a question. If we think of the first kind of revolution, or one of the first revolutions, is a revolution of agriculture that promoted or made possible humongous population spike. I think I read this in that book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, where they talk about agriculture being, something that caused a huge population spike. But the people that were new, like this huge population, was now nourished less so than the previous smaller population because of the homogeny of what they were eating. Because they were eating mostly wheat. They were eating mostly these things that they grew in large quantities. So they didn't have the diversity of food. And so they had teeth decay, and they had different symptoms, physiological symptoms of being less healthy than their predecessors. Now, I would argue, as we go from agriculture, where our predecessors are stronger than the new folks, this agricultural-based people, now we have another revolution of industrialization. And I would say that in order to put all these people in these industrial machines, we then again have a group of people, while greater in number, are less robust than the people that came before them. So we're getting more people.
What is your standard of robust?
I mean, I guess I get there. This all came to me yesterday because I interviewed a guy who, and during our interview, started talking about just the impacts of capitalism on his particular area, private equity buying up all these things, and it just seems like industrialization is really not great for the masses, in a way that agriculture wasn't great for the masses.
But what is the standard by which you make that assessment?
I think it would be mental health, physical health.
But if we look at where we have metrics for example, physical health, we see with industrialization, extension of lifespan, reduction of disease. So we see a lot of
some diseases. But what if they live longer, but they have more anxiety, more stress, more,
You think we have more anxiety and stress than someone who's living in a food system where your access to that food is very much predetermined by seasonal fluctuations and do you see what I'm saying? Like even in a pre-agricultural space. So this my argument would be that we do need to understand that things fundamentally change at these moments, right? And I think they often change for the better in some ways and for the worse in other ways.
Yeah, the question is, I think a simple life where one has a real relationship with... The problem for me is it's gotten so convoluted. Life is about very basic things. Eating, going to potty, having sex, sleeping, having community, right? It's five, maybe, are there other things that I'm missing here? Drinking water, it's pretty basic. And now, to do all of those things, you
need a freaking calendar.
You don't dig in the dirt. You don't pull any food out of the dirt. You don't hunt anything. You go to this computer to do social things. It seems like there's so many steps in between all of the basic things of life, and that's supposed to make our life simpler, but I don't think it does.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is merit to the idea that it's not making our life simpler. I do think we can easily, partly because we're not living it, overestimate how
nice it was.
Right? We can, and the reality is that and part of what you have to ask yourself is when agriculture happens, why does it take off? Right? Because it does provide a set of...
People want to have babies. They want to have more
right.
people. We want to have more people.
Yeah, but I think, but that's the point. Is like, what is it satisfying? It's taking the day-to-day struggle to access food in a pre-agricultural system, which, even though you spend less time doing it because you don't have as much time available to do it, you can limit the risk of death from starvation by migrating to agriculture. And that means you can have more people because you're limiting that death to starve, especially for the most vulnerable, babies and toddlers, right?
Yeah.
So those things are real, but that doesn't negate the notion that things fundamentally do shift in real ways. And I think that there's a level at which I resist kind of going back to an
romanticizing.
Romanticizing.
I feel that.
But that doesn't necessarily negate the diagnosis that something fundamentally happens at these moments that restructure how we relate to things like food, how we relate to things like how we take care of each other, and whatever those transformations this is with, if we accept a kind of evolutionary narrative, right? This is with a set of organisms, human beings, who, going back to your point about life is simple, who are, as an organism, oriented around food, reproduction, small, like community.
It's simple stuff.
50 to 100 person community, right? And so the information, like, just think about the information management task you have for your social life today to have community. It's not just about finding the 50 to 100 people you can have that relationship, that community with, but managing, what is really a layer of like 300, 400 communities you might be involved with when you get down to it, each contributing a whole set of relationships. So you're more of a node in a network than a member of a group.
So we're back to the book where they talk about transcending from a hierarchical structure where your values based on your distance from the top to a network structure where your value is how many nodes connect to you and the quality of those nodes.
And I think that there is, and I think especially today, that transformation is real in our economic relationships, meaning our relationships by which we acquire the goods and services to live our lives, right? In a way Yeah, it just wasn't even 50 years ago. If you think about how you get food,
Yeah.
and you go back to someone in the 1970s, right? How would you get food in the 1970s if you were living in Crestview?
Well, there'd be farmers,
There'd be farmers around, but you probably...
ranchers and farmers.
I mean, this
right?
is developed like you would go to the Minimax, right? You would go to the IGA down the street when it was an IGA, or there was a local grocery store.
Yeah.
And you usually had one that was within range, right?
I think the thing that I get
But now
angry
you've got
about because
all these different things, like you've got HEB, you've got grocery stores, you've got farm to table, delivery services, you have farmers. Like just the information task of figuring out how to manage your food web is much more complex and much less simple.
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. You get angry about what?
I just get angry about it with every single step in between the simple thing and accessing it. You have cost. You have middlemen, and there's like way more of them. I guess I'm just kind of really late stage capitalism comes to mind a lot lately as I just need to probably get off of content for a little bit. I need to stop watching media because I'm like, I don't think we're going the right direction, and I don't think this is going to end well. And I don't feel better exposing myself to media when it's like Vanguard and BlackRock and State Street are owning everything and privatizing every area of your life. Things that should not be privatized, from healthcare to mental health care to like real estate to food to every aspect of the human's experience is now being controlled by these very small number of people, small companies.
And not just controlled by a small number of people, but controlled by a small number of people who understand their ethical obligations to be the generation of capital, not the generation of a good life for the people that they're working with.
Yeah.
Right. And there's already a problem if you concentrate power to a small number of people in a governance structure that understands its role. However much we want to criticize classic governance structures like monarchies, a monarch understood their role to be, if they reflected on it, as an ethical obligation. And we see this in South Asian structures of monarchy, East Asian structures of monarchy, European structures of monarchy. Like, at the end of the day, if you're the emperor of China, at the end of the day, if you're a king in Europe,
you're responsible for a bunch of people.
You're responsible for a bunch of people, and people who don't do that well are criticized for not doing that well.
But we're not doing that.
But we're not doing, we don't say, Vanguard, you're doing a bad job of taking care of people, because we don't even ask them of that.
Capitalism at its root is a form for distributing wealth to all the people, I would think, and to allow folks to get compensated for their value that they add into society.
Right.
But if all of the money goes to these places, there's not money to distribute to all of the people because it's being consolidated. It's being like hoarded. I don't understand. And it's just this downward spiral of then those people control the government because they've got the money to invest in politics. And then we just get more of it and more of it and more of it. And it just replicates itself. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to turn that tide.
Right.
And America right now thinks Trump's going to do it.
Right.
Clearly they do. I mean, we have a majority of Americans. And you know what? I could be swayed that direction. Like, I wasn't a fan of Kamala.
Right.
I would have voted for Kamala because I didn't want Trump.
Right.
But I didn't want Kamala.
Right. Because it's the same. Like, it didn't feel like a choice between someone who is trumpeting the worst of late stage capitalism and someone who will get us out of the problems of late stage capitalism. It felt like a choice between someone who seemed to be trumpeting the worst of late stage capitalism and someone who's trumpeting late stage capitalism with a few band-aids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think that's actually part of what led to the election going the direction it is. Like, if you look at why people
are mad,
voted the way they were, the Democrats built themselves on not being Trump, but people were just as
You can't
dissatisfied.
build yourself on
Right.
not being something
Right.
else.
And-
Coke doesn't advertise itself
and I
as
think
like,
a-
hey, drink Coke. We're not Pepsi.
And I think people were like, well, these people are saying that they're not that guy, and that guy at least says he has some things, even if they sound like bullshit. So
Yeah.
I'll try the bullshit first. Right?
And
yeah. So it was a strategic error. But I think at the end of the day, it's because we're caught up in this game of trying to, I mean, I'm also increasingly convinced that we're not at a stage where we're continuing to look for political solutions from the top are going to get us where we need to go, right? No
Yeah.
politician is going to.
Well,
save
because
us.
they're controlled by the lobbies, and we've got everybody but us
And
controlling what
and at
goes
the-
on up there.
And at the end of the day,
masses.
they also belong to a class of people who, by the very nature of who they are, have as their primary interest the advancement of their political careers.
Yeah.
And that has only become reinforced in the past decades. And they're unapologetic about it now. If I look at kind of the difference between politicians 50 years ago and politicians now, 50 years ago, they would pretend like they were trying to govern. They don't even pretend that anymore. They just pretend like they're going to be able to be the people in power, right? And I know that there's a certain level of hypocrisy to that earlier generation of politicians, but it's a hypocrisy that at least meant that they had to pretend to govern, and so they got some actual governance done in the meantime. There's a part of what I've realized is maybe we actually need to, in our politicians, tolerate the hypocrisy more and just play the game with them. It's like, no, we want you to govern. Cut out this nonsense.
Yeah.
But instead we've caught up in the kind of like team sport of whether my side won or your side won.
And no one wins at the bottom.
Right.
There's no populist party anymore.
Right. And that just may not be where we're going to get solutions. We may need to actually just focus on building relationships, building communities, working with each other, and build this from the bottom up instead of trying to go to national politics. I do think like if people want solutions, they need to focus.
Oh, but they just throw money
Far
into
more.
marketing. They've got great marketers.
Just ignore it. Focus on your local politics first, right? If you want to do politics, start there. That is the majority of what's going to impact your day-to-day life.
This goes back to that locus of control.
Right.
What can you influence versus what's the other one? Influence versus awareness
And that's a way to address the anger. Because when I hear you talking about the anger here, and it's also the anger reading, it's an anger that is rooted in hopelessness. Like
hopelessness.
I don't understand what the heck this guy is talking about. I don't know if I can even get my head around it. Why does he have to be like that and take the power of my understanding away from me?
Yeah. Well, I don't have, it takes away my faith in humanity. and even doing this takes away my faith because I watch all this and it seems like what folks want is us arguing. What folks want is provocative content. What folks want is like sex, drugs, rock and roll. If you were someone that went to jail for murder and is out now and talks about your experience in prison, there'd be tons of people wanting to watch it. And we're just perpetuating like this negativity and this like, why don't we have the role models in music, in movies, in podcasts, and in TV be simple life folks? He got up. He was nice to all of his neighbors. He didn't fight with anybody. That's not exciting.
I mean, well, it's interesting because like you look at the whole cozy phenomena. Have you followed that at all?
No, what's up with cozy?
It's like a whole sort of online aesthetic phenomena. There's cozy fiction.
I need to tap into cozy.
Yeah, because cozy is really all about, there's cozy gaming. It's all about just sort of like,
let's just chill, man.
Let's assert the value of coziness, of being chill, of being comfortable, and spending time in that space with each other.
I think that's probably better for the human spirit.
Yeah.
Because this yellow journalism taken to the max is really just perpetuating the things that we don't want in society.
Right.
Because we're low-key modeling it for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And not even low-key, high volume, all the music. And I love hip-hop music, but how did I get to be in alignment with Tipper Gore and Nancy Reagan. When did that happen? That I'm like, we really should put more thoughtfulness into what we're platforming.
Right. But well, and I think there's a different way. So what's the problem with Tipper Gore and Nancy Reagan to me is they were like, we need to create more rules from the top to make people be thoughtful about what they're performing and make sure only the proper performers go out.
You need that to happen from the bottom.
But I think what we need to do is say, as creatives, as performers, as creators of content, how do we take responsibility to do the work that is in front of us to contribute
In a meaningful,
thoughtful way.
But if no one watches, if you can't find an audience and you see other people with an audience with this more extreme stuff,
right?
You just slowly, it might take a while, but it slowly goes, oh.
Yeah, I mean,
when I get excited, they like it. When I talk about.
I mean, if your model is to enter into the entrepreneurship model that is the heart of late stage capitalism, that you just need to accumulate the capital, the views, the whatnot, to just sort of generate a capital stream to sustain yourself, it's going to be hard.
Because you're playing the same game that
you're trying
to not do. I don't know how to pay the mortgage and get food and do all that stuff and not play the game.
I know. That's why capitalism sucks.
Yeah.
Because part of its and I mean, and when I say that, I mean the real.
It's not working for the masses
as an ideological form. I mean, I'm not a critic of capitalism that necessarily says market-based economies based on freedom of exchange are by their nature bad, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I tend to believe that mid-20th century American capitalism, with all its problems, coming out of the 1970s, was just going in the right direction, because it was a form of capitalism that tried to emphasize the value of free exchange, but also recognize that there are many areas where we engage in free exchange that the privatization of that free exchange needs to be reined in, whether that is healthcare or whether that is food. I mean, look at the history of food deserts. You know what a food desert is?
I've heard of these.
Yeah.
Tell me more about food
food desert. I lived in a food desert in Philadelphia. It's a place where, and they're often urban areas, although they're also rural areas. My mother-in-law lived in a food desert. The closest grocery store, full-service grocery store to her, south of Houston, outside of Houston, was a 45-minute drive.
What?
That's part of why we had to move her here, right?
45 minutes drive to a full-service grocery store?
Right. Exactly.
What?
And, I'd be in Philadelphia.
And she was in the city?
No, she's in the rural area. That's what I'm saying. But in the city, it may not be quite as far a drive, but you're in an urban area with a lot of people, especially like in Philadelphia, don't have cars, and they don't necessarily have, I would have to go miles within a city once I got far enough out into West Philadelphia to get a full-service grocery store.
So why is this important? Why is food?
So if you look at the history of food deserts, there's not a food desert problem in the 70s, right?
Well, because in the rural areas, there were farmers and ranchers and they had community.
There's a lot,
and in the urban areas, they needed groceries that came from the rural area.
It's not the agricultural system itself. It's the grocery system that changed, right?
Well, there weren't grocery stores in rural areas, were there?
There were small grocery stores in each little town that provided full-service grocery stores, even though they were small. And they've been replaced by these big box grocery stores like H-E-B, right? So what happened in the 1980s? Well, Reagan deregulated the grocery industry. The grocery industry actually had a level of pricing regulation that was there to try to make sure that the food web remained accessible to people. And on an ideology of free market economics, he came in and said, well, this is nonsense. This isn't going to produce the best access to food because you don't have competition. And so deregulated it. And when he deregulated it, just like when banking was deregulated, what you see is then the consolidation and concentration of capital into increasingly larger entities who then dominate the market.
And then
they drive up the prices even worse because now they control it and they can harvest that for capital.
So when it goes wrong, it goes wrong everywhere.
Yeah. Capitalism works when it's maintained as a small scale entity, right? I think if I were designing the perfect system, And here we're just shooting our mouth off, right?
Yeah.
A bit of a distance from where we were with
Yeah.
the book. But I would say you'd want a system where there's a certain level of scale that you're just not allowed to operate at that scale, right? Scale can bring a lot of advantages, but some of those advantages bring so much vicious incentives.
Well, it gets
and
fragile because when a mistake happens, it's kind of like the romaine industry or whatever. When you have one provider or two providers giving the romaine to the whole country, if there's E. coli in romaine, it goes everywhere.
Right.
Whereas if we have a romaine person making romaine, sending romaine out in every state, if it goes wrong, it goes wrong in one state.
Right. And if your approach to solving the problem of E. coli is to say, let's centralize this, let's control the whole romaine system.
And
so
make sure it's
make
always
sure
clean.
that E. coli never happens. Well, you're not going to pull that off.
You're not gonna pull it up because mistakes happen, number one. And number two, when they centralize it, a lot of people lose jobs, and all of the money, all the margins, because someone's going to make a lot more money, right? They're going to optimize on the economies of scale and all of those things. That stuff doesn't filter down. This Reaganomics, this trickle-down economics, that's not a thing. They just say, oh, this is more money for our stockholders. This is more money for our CEO. This is more money. So it ends up being just like a cash grab. And then there's less people at the bottom making money in general. And then the money they make goes straight to the top. Mm-hmm. And then when something bad happens, it happens everywhere because you've got a system, like a small system that controls everything. Mm-hmm. This is why I just need to stop getting involved, like understanding, because there's nothing I can, if I can use this platform to complain and people like it and maybe someone does something about it, that'd be great.
But I guess this is a question. Where do you get off caring about things at that scale? Right?
Where do I get off caring about things at a national scale?
Right. Like I'm just thinking like, and I'm using that
that's
as
why
kind of accusatory sense. Like I think at the root there is this sense of like we approach these problems like they're problems where what we need to do is become the controller and solve the problem.
Well, because they've taken us with communication and technology. I think I'm just going to make a wild statement and we can both decide whether or not it's true or not. Because of communication and technology, folks focus more on a world stage or a national stage than they do on a local stage.
Yes, I think that to some extent. And I think
which is the opposite of what needs to happen.
Right.
We need to be focused in our local stage and be like, what's going on with my neighbor? What's going on with our communities here?
Right.
Then what's going on in,
But what's going on there affects, like there are things, but I think, yes, I mean, the larger point you're making, I think is true. The way I would rephrase it is we need to shift from looking at a problem and saying, if I could just get control of this situation, how could we solve it? And why aren't people doing that who are in control of the situation? And instead say, coming back to the network idea, as a node within a network of relationships, what can I do to contribute to the good, right? Coming back to your point about you said I'm losing my faith in humanity. Faith in humanity is an interesting idea. Like, is faith in humanity what we want? I mean, if humanity is actually not functioning to pull it off, is faith what we need, right?
Yeah.
Maybe what we need. And I was sitting and thinking, do I have faith in humanity? I don't think I do. I don't even think I think in terms of faith in humanity or lack of faith in humanity. What I do have is a love for humanity.
Well, I
think that's a different thing to say because faith has expectations about what that other is going to do. Love accepts and then tries to work with it.
What is faith? Like, if I were to break that down, for me, faith is like, have we motivated in humans, in our class, if you will, our like 2024 humans, this model, all of them, have we motivated in them the right levels of compassion, empathy, greed, all of the, the basic structures of humanity to make this successful? And I would say no, that we haven't. At least the people in the top, they're probably not evil, but their motivations are just so skewed.
Right. I mean, that's what I was when I'm talking about a political class. Again, it's not that this person or that person is a good or bad person. I mean, I think there is some level at which character can shape your ability to operate when you move into a certain political class, but it's not going to erase the realities that once you enter into that game, there's a whole set of rules you're going to have to start playing by that have vicious motivations that are going to be about advancing your career. Right?
Well,
and I think that's what you're saying. Like, there's the motivation system is set up wrong.
Yeah.
Right. But is the question for us, that's actually a real question that we can wrestle with. How do we make the motivations right? Because again, like, to make the motivation right means I'd have to like get in there and get on the top and restructure things to make it right.
And then in your ascension to the top, you become them, because as you move up, you're just like, I'm changing into.
And a big part of the problem seems to be our need to gather and control, right? That motivation to gather and control more and more of the world for ourselves, to be at the top, seems to be what we've validated, what we've celebrated when we celebrate our paragons of industry.
Yeah.
Success.
Yeah.
Like, we're celebrating, like, that's a mode of exercising power.
We all want everything.
Right.
On an island, we all want a boat. We all want everything.
But we also have an ability to cultivate different motivations. That's the heart of the argument around Buddhism, I think, this is that we can cultivate different
compassion.
But ultimately, and I do think this is the argument of Buddhism from the beginning, and why Buddhism, like a big critique of Buddhism, when people look at it as a religion over time, is relatively apolitical, right?
Yeah.
It does seem to engage with political power, but it, like, when you look at the early narratives of Buddhist engagement with political power, it's not about converting nations. It's about converting kings, right? With a hope that bringing the set of motivations rooted around compassion and enlightenment to the kings will also then reshape the way they rule so that you have a just, more verdant, and we can debate whether that's true or not, right? But they're not even looking at political power as kind of a set of political structures around this that we need to, that doesn't happen until engage Buddhism in the 20th century. That's when you begin to have Thich Nhat Hanh and others look at
going to the Paris Accords and
right.
stuff.
And that there may be work to do there, right? There may be political work to do there within the context of Buddhism. I'm not taking that question up right now, but I am saying there does seem to be a kind of wisdom that, like, the problems are not particularly different. Their food, their livability, they're having an ability to have a good life in the face of human ignorance and suffering, right? There's the reality that people seem to embrace lives that seem counterproductive.
Yeah.
And even without that, we live in a world where we're going to die. We're going to get sick.
We're going to die.
We're going to get old, right?
Yeah.
Like old age, like, and so
he just went through the Buddha's, Siddhartha's journey
right.
through the town.
Right, exactly.
He saw sick people. He saw old people. He saw.
These are not different problems that we're just the way the technical aspects of what we're doing are still there. And so on one level, the solution seems to blow it up bigger. And that seems to be what he's saying by the end, right? When he looks at the Bodhisattva ideal, right?
Yeah.
Is, and it's kind of interesting because he's basically saying, hey, there's this problem about thinking about people who are not here, and can Buddhism help us? And here's some problems. And then at the end, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, that Bodhisattva ideal, think about it. It's already doing that. Like, the very nature of a Bodhisattva vow is, I will give up enlightenment until I bring others to that, right?
Yeah.
And the way it's usually is through all sentient beings. And often, and I remember this from some of the prayers of aspiration that I learned when I was studying Buddhism directly. do already say in these ancient texts, all sentient beings who exist or don't exist yet, like who are to come, right? There's already a system which has been saying, hey, we need to be attentive to the needs of others forever.
Well, there's a part of this where he's saying like, we are energy in a world where it's one. There is no time. Like we are intergenerational,
Right.
beings.
Right. Those
like,
relationships, and it's that
across time.
recognition. And ultimately, he's still rooted in what we've seen throughout this text, which is a lot of it comes back to no self, right? It comes
Emptiness.
back to anatman and emptiness and saying, like, look, you think you're a thing that is a thing in itself apart from other things.
Yeah, he talks about that.
And you're not. You're a node in a network of relationships. And by the way, those relationships go on forever. And on one level, that means, and I'm not necessarily arguing this is the way we need to go, but I'm interested in it as an argument. That means we need to radically personalize how we think about our ethics. And instead of saying what needs to be different up here, I think what he's saying and what the argument would be is the way out of that moment of paralysis that comes with that anger, right? Because that anger is a frustration of not being able to do anything. Is not how do I get up there to change the system, but how do I change myself to operate in whatever the system is to produce more good for others that I'm in relationship with.
Yeah.
That's one part. And second, to recognize that that is bigger than me. And if I'm going to do it on the scale where I would have any impact on the total system, I'm going to have to commit myself to do this through all my reincarnations from here on out. Right? But it's a very personal work, and it's a very long work. And I think what he's ultimately arguing is that by anchoring in compassion in those moments, that immediate recognition of the needs of another and suffering, and attending to that suffering, we begin to escape the helplessness of the scale of what we're confronting.
Well, because you've got something, the mind has something to do.
The mind has something to do. And then if you can find a way to kind of have a big... Now, the problem with the Bodhisattva vow is it relies on a metaphysics of reincarnation.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't necessarily have confidence that there's going to be a me around to do much more work after I'm dead.
It won't be you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It won't be a you. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe something goes on or not. I don't even know that. I get to a different place with that. I mean, I think that to me, I find, one of the most compelling spiritual teachings I confronted in my youth that sticks with me forever, right? Since then, about the work we do as human beings. And I encountered it when I was studying Freemasonry and looking at the influence of Christian Hebraism, which is sort of Christians studying Jewish traditions and incorporating them into their own, usually Christian understanding of the world, right? This starts in the Renaissance. And it's a lot of like the influence of Jewish Kabbalah on Freemasonry and occultism and stuff like that comes from this early Christian Hebraism, was part of what I was interested in. And a concept that is still important in a lot of Jewish thought, especially social justice thought, but is important in that late medieval Renaissance Kabbalah is the notion of Tikkun, of repair, right? And it's this notion that the world is broken, right? Now, in this case, the world is broken because when God created the world, his light was so radiant and so beautiful that it shattered the vessels of the world and created all these problems in the world, right? But that our work, again, in the context of here, our work as children of God, right? But our work as spiritual beings, our work as human beings, is to participate in the repair of that damage, right? And what's powerful about this is you're part of a larger project and you have something to do.
Yeah.
You're not in control, right? Now, I don't know how useful it is to shift that control to a cosmic entity, right?
Sky Daddy.
Yeah, in that sort of monotheistic framework. It's not a way I can make sense of the world.
Yeah.
I was talking to a neighbor recently, last night, about it, and it's just sort of like, he was very advocating monotheism as this sort of natural thing we would arrive at if we're just smart enough. And I'm just like, it doesn't make sense to me. But the notion that there's a work to do, but that work is what you can contribute instead of taking control of the whole. And I think that what he offers here is a different kind of vision of that, where the work is the work of a kind of basic human ability to recognize suffering.
Yeah.
To recognize.
Yeah, that's what he said
unhappiness.
compassion was. Compassion is to see suffering and be moved by it.
Yeah. And be moved up by it to try to end it.
To end it.
Yeah. Which is the initial move of the Buddha, right? Now, he's got a whole program then that comes from that says, well, when I think about it, that suffering is anchored in our grasping, and you need to get rid of the grasping, and we can examine that or not, or whether that does that. But I don't think compassion relies on that to be a potent tool.
When I read this last night, I thought about it within the context of a grocery trip with my daughter. My daughter and I went to the grocery store, and I'd been reading this chapter, and I was laid off, I guess, last July, and austerity measures have taken hold.
Yeah.
I'm not.
You got to tighten your belt.
I've been tightening the belt in every way, right? I used to drink kombucha. I don't drink kombucha anymore. I used to, not really worry when I went to the grocery store. I just buy whatever I wanted. And now I don't do that.
Yeah.
I only buy things that I think we really need.
Circumstances that force a level of mindfulness on you.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, difficult for my daughter to understand. Because she wants things.
Yeah, because especially at an adolescent age, the engine is turned on want. Yeah.
And, there's a lot of saying no.
Yep.
And then there's a lot of the same kind of way I felt reading this was inadequacy.
Right.
Guilt.
Yeah.
Shame. Because she'll say stuff like, you should just get that job. You should get another one of those jobs so that I can have all these things I want.
Right.
And then, she wanted something kind of simple. It was like these fancy markers or fancy pens that were different colors. And there was the expensive ones, the brand that were $12. And then there was the grocery store brand that was like $4. And I was like, I'll buy them. I'll buy these ones. And it seemed like she suffered as a result of having to buy the $4 ones.
Right.
And I thought, well, I could alleviate her suffering. If I followed this, if I felt her suffering and wanted to alleviate her suffering, and that was the goal. My goal is just to alleviate my child's suffering in that moment and buy the $12 pens. I could do that. Is that what I do over and over? Is prioritize ending suffering? Because when you look at this, they talk about dana is to give. Yeah. And it's like, how much do I not consider my own place and my own scarcity and my own concerns and give? And that's the question I have.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think that's part of. And this may be the argument for a system like Buddhism, right? That just the desire to relieve suffering may not be enough if you also don't have a sufficient system for diagnosing what's causing that suffering.
Yeah,
because from a classic Buddhist perspective, buying the $12 markers is not relieving suffering, because the problem, she's not suffering because she got the markers that were less expensive. She's suffering because she craves the markers that are more expensive. And getting the markers that are more expensive is just a very temporary palliative that doesn't address the craving. and the craving is the root of the suffering.
I should have just explained that to her.
Right. I'm sure she would have been totally like, oh, I totally understand
Totally
that.
understand
It's
that,
just
Dad.
the craving.
Buy me those cheap markers now, Dad.
Right. No, and I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because then you can't solve anyone else's addiction to craving.
Well, then can't everything be put down to craving
I think to a certain extent,
and compassion? I mean, where
you
does
can only
compassion
solve it.
start and
You
where
can
does
only
it end
solve
in a
the
world?
craving in yourself. I mean, let's look at that example, like in a kind of classic Theravada, like ancient school form of Buddhism. The work, if you're a monk, of giving,
Donna.
right? What is your work in that? The most fundamental work you engage in giving, because you've gone through so many other things that you've given up already.
Yeah.
Right?
You got the robe. You've even given up your hair.
You've given up your hair. And your job is actually to be a receptacle of giving. Your main role within the kind of social system of Buddhism
It's to receive.
is to go beg for food and give lay people the opportunity
to
gain
experience
merit,
giving.
to experience that by feeding you. Now, that's also rooted in a vow where you have said, I'm not going to generate my... So if I go out and beg and you don't give me food, I don't get food, right? Like, I'm not allowed to prepare my own food. That's part of the... so there's a whole set of things that are in there, but it does create this social system that ultimately sees kind of, if you think of a higher order of operating within that system, is to do a work that is more about creating the opportunities for other people to enter that stream
Yeah.
than to try to participate in that stream. Not because you're not participating in that stream, but you're just participating in it on a level that is far deeper than you're even going to expect them to do in their lifetime.
Yeah, because you've given everything.
Yeah.
You've
given yourself to the work.
Yeah, your Donna is your life.
Yes. Yeah, I think that is yeah. And you are, like, if you're, in a classic monastic, you're practicing that offering, that giving through making offerings in the morning of mantra. You're making, you're making offerings of words, you're making offerings of fire, you're making all those kind of liturgical offerings, which are the way you have trained yourself to practice. But for the lay person, you're giving them the opportunity to practice that by feeding you. And I just find that interesting, because that's sort of like...
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's a different way to think about even hierarchy and what the role of hierarchy is. You're not moving to the top of the system. In many ways, you're moving to the bottom and trying to rule from the bottom.
Yeah, the best of us aren't doing that.
Yeah.
At least the most successful of us aren't doing that. Jimmy Carter passed away. Mm-hmm. And I always looked up to that man. Mm-hmm. I always thought he was a great president. And then I looked at the things he'd done after his presidency. Mm-hmm. Building houses and speaking at a church. Like, you could go to this church where he continued to serve. Mm-hmm. And I thought, in my lifetime, it seems like Bill Clinton has been a bigger figure than Jimmy Carter. And Bill Clinton, it's really an act of marketing that I would consider him at all a good person.
Yeah, he was a political tool.
Yeah, and really,
like,
someone that should have been wrapped up in Me Too in a big way.
Right. You never get the impression with the Clintons that they had a vision of a good life that was driving them. You get the impression, maybe they did somewhere back there at the beginning, but you get the impression that they were excited to go with this particular vision of the good life because through their political career, that's how they had made themselves politically relevant and developed a career. Like, I think we... Sure. Jimmy Carter was a career politician like everyone else.
He was, right? But it seemed like...
But there's a level at which he does seem, and maybe we're romanticizing the past. I just put that there. But it does seem like he may have been the last president we had that seemed to be operating with an understanding that his job was to make the world better for Americans.
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The leaders that believed, whether they were in a monarchy or whatever, that ruled over a land, that they believed their job was to make the people's lives better.
Right.
Those should have been the successful ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, if anything, during a time of major international global reconfiguration of the economic system, it's happening in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Because 1970s is really the point at which globally the process of decolonization and the reconstructing of the economic system from a colonial economic system into a global capitalist economic system is happening.
Yeah.
And that reconfiguration is hard, right? It's resulting in major resource shortages because it's a system that's reconfiguring.
Yeah,
right?
it's volatile.
It's volatile, and it hasn't figured out how to get to some level of equilibrium, right? He's caught up in the middle of that. And he's asking a lot of people. He's asking them to, you know, you think about kind of what is often described as his big political mistake was the Malaise speech. Do you know this?
Mm-mm.
Where he basically, he gives this speech where he comes to Americans and says like we're facing a lot of problems, and part of the problem is that like we've become addicted to stuff. We've become addicted to, and this is not exactly how he says it, but basically he's critiquing our desire to value ourselves and each other based on our income, on our gross domestic output, like all those things.
Yeah.
Not that those aren't important. He's not saying, but he's saying at the heart of it is that that's how we've come to value ourselves as a nation.
And that's a corrosive metric.
And people say when he gave this speech, he kind of lost the plot and people started to resent him for being admonishing. What's interesting is like I was listening to a kind of review of this speech by a scholar who just wrote a book on this, is that if you go back, the White House received this overwhelming amount of mail at that time in the archive of people saying, I'm so glad you're finally, like actually, even though the political spin was that this was really upsetting people and alienating people, at least immediately, a lot of people seem to respond by like, thank you for
I think a lot of people know
being a leader, right?
I think a lot of people know that the way that we're going or have gone for a long time, worshiping, you know, false idols, whatever, I don't know what it is in a religious term, where we're worshiping brands, we're worshiping products over people, we're have our minds in these devices, we're eating garbage. Like, I think people know that this isn't the way to go.
Right.
A majority of folks, it's just,
but it's
the tools that are used to change our behavior and to ingrain habits are so strong that they win over this distant, faint voice of this isn't good, this isn't working, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't be on your phone right before bed, you shouldn't pick it up right in the morning.
Right.
But we can't help it because they've gotten to the mammalian part of our brain by using all the best I'm just spitting.
Well, and they've said it's easy, right? It's easy. You don't have to worry about that. We'll take care of that. Like you can have everything, and that's what Reagan did. He came along and said, no, we don't have to cut back on anything. We just need to deregulate.
Reagan was a GE, General Electric. Yeah. He was a businessman,
right? And he sold the American people that like, no, we don't need to consume less. We need to consume more. We just need to ramp up this system, get the capital moving, and we've had 50 years of that, and look where we are.
Look where we are.
Right?
Where are we?
Because our political leaders were not willing to be honest with us anymore about some of the sacrifices we would actually have to make this work.
And I don't think our political leaders are our political leaders.
Right.
These aren't our when you think about what a politician does,
they're not political leaders, they're political followers.
Well, they're they're followers of whoever's paying them, and now we've got with that big Supreme Court case where corporations can give huge amounts of money. So now, who are they going to be beholden to? They're going to be beholden to business. And what is business? BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think what's important is to recognize that because we operate through a mode of industrialization that is caught up with capital at such a high level, we're not talking about business in terms of firms that produce goods and services being the dominant businesses that take control of the system. It's the capital-based businesses. It's exactly what you're saying. It's private equity. It's investment firms. It's those who
they're getting paid by controlling the industry, not necessarily
right.
by doing the industry.
And what are they actually controlling? They're controlling access to
enter into the industry
They're controlling access to that thing we have come to use as our market of value, our marker of value, right? We have come to a place where when we want to understand the value of something, what do we call? When people say, hey, how is that going to be valuable for me? What is the language people use today? What's my return on investment?
Oh yeah,
right.
ROI.
Right. What's the ROI? And there's an importance to that. Like I see this in my work at community college, and they're always like, "What's the ROI? What's the ROI?" And there's a value to. I think there's a good to saying, "What is the good that's going to come out of us putting the resources into this thing?" Right?
Yeah.
But when you use the language of return on investment, you're using financialized language, and so your metaphor of value is always going to drift to the financial metric as what gives you value, right? So if what we say is valuable is financial good, which is kind of absurd because financial good's only valuable in as much as it actually brings us material resources.
You cannot eat money.
You cannot eat money. You cannot live in money.
You can't like rub money on your skin and get healthy.
Right. Right. I sometimes think we would be better off if we focused back on wealth as opposed to capital.
How does it, or enrichment?
Right. And understanding enrichment on a material level. Like, we can talk about enrichment on a spiritual level, on a personal level, and maybe that's part of it, but even solely on a material level. If we think of, in terms of wealth, meaning goods and services that lead to a good life.
Lead to a good life.
Yeah, I think that's, and resources, good services and resources that lead to a good life. And how do we create a system, how do we participate in a system that generates wealth, right? Again, not financial wealth necessarily.
Yeah.
Financial wealth needs to be understood as a means to an end. But we've constructed a system with middle players who, by the way we've constructed this system, operationalize the accumulation of financial wealth as the good, right? And that's, yeah.
I want to talk about something that's topical.
Good.
And I think
we've got like 5 minutes and
dang, we do.
We've talked a little bit about the book.
This United Healthcare CEO that got unalived, and the world seems to be like cool with it. And I mean, I'm kind of cool with it. Mm-hmm. And the way that I get there is you got these insurance companies that are allowing people to come to a place of unaliveness. I feel like I'm doing verbal gymnastics for, you can't say certain words, but
I don't think that's true anymore. They've gotten rid of the fact checkers and everything. You can say whatever you want.
They've
it's community notes now.
That's Facebook. So these corporations, these insurance companies lead to people having unaliveness, the ness of being unalive. They lead to people losing their life, lead to people, because they don't have access to things that they paid for access. And yet this blood isn't on their hands.
Right.
They found some way to put these middlemen there, and unaliveness over here doesn't map to what you would call murder over here.
Right.
Which how does that washing happen in between the decisions, the discernment of these bureaucracies and these people at the top that make those decisions and the people on the ground that are experiencing these tragedies?
Mm-hmm.
Like, infuriating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's your question?
My question, I don't think I have a question. It's just we're discussing this notion, and I don't know. It's just
I found that an interesting moment.
I mean, it didn't hurt that the guy's stunning.
Yeah.
He's like in front of a waterfall,
Right.
looking ripped, but
yeah, no, I found it an interesting moment because I think both personally and just sort of as a nation, like, yeah, when I look at the response, like, cause it was also just watching the media, like half the media was like, look at all these people who are celebrating this guy's death. And yeah, like maybe we should. And the other half was like, what is wrong with America that they're celebrating murder? And it just seemed to like miss the point. Cause the point seemed to be like, yes, it was hard for me to feel compassion for that CEO.
yeah,
Right. And so for me, part of my work was to generate that compassion.
for the CEO.
For the CEO, right? To say, yes, I need to recognize that at the end of the day, someone with a family, whatever his implications for everything else, right, was murdered in cold blood.
His family's probably garbage people, though.
Not
literal garbage people. Right. Those are salt of the earth. They're probably entitled people that are just going to perpetuate that class.
Maybe not, but they're human beings who are going to suffer because they lost their dad.
That's true.
You know what I mean? And so like that's kind of, and I recognize that I had to do that work to get there. So that's one thing. The other thing is looking at both the recognition that I had to do that work and this, like, what is that about? I think there's also a natural response to injustice. Right now, we have a system that holds certain people accountable at a very severe level for small infractions against the group. Right? You stole a candy bar and you're the wrong person in the wrong class.
But if you steal 1 billion candy bars, you're
right. You may end up in jail for 5 years. Your life is ruined. Your kids are cut off from you. There's a whole set of things that have generational consequences that come into play because our justice system looks at that and says that's a crime. But if you set up a system that or you should know if you are taking the time to look at things as a leader of that system, is resulting in pain and suffering and death for a wide group of people, but you're doing it for business reasons. Yeah. At the end of the day, what is the argument? Well, we're getting a good return on investment.
We're getting an ROI.
So we have started to value the capital over life. And when we see that level of injustice and accountability, it becomes very natural to say, yeah, but at least that guy is being held accountable.
Right now, he was held accountable by
Luigi. Someone went and held that person accountable. And it helps that the murderer is saying, I would, he's given all indication I was here to hold that guy accountable, right?
Yeah, he wrote it on the bullets.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Defend, deny.
Right. So yes, I can understand. I equally have compassion for
this dude might get off.
Popular response.
He might walk for this.
Right. So that's, and as someone who's trying to support elder care.
Yeah, it's very topical.
It's very topical.
I knew this was a different topic, Grant.
And you know what the reality is, Phil? I mean, it's totally anecdotal, but it sure seems like the before and after of that moment, we're having a lot less headache with our insurance company.
Yeah, folks are probably, I've got 2 things about this.
So there do seem to be some consequences that may have been good that came out of that.
2 things. One, I knew this was a different subject, when I was at the gym working out, and sometimes we talk while we work out, and I brought up this P. Diddy thing, Puff Daddy. You know, he's wrapped up in all this weird, what is it, reproduction stuff. I don't know the word for sexual stuff. But anyway, he's kind of wrapped Jay-Z up into it too now. And I was saying like, hey, what do you guys think about this Jay-Z thing? And someone in the class said, I don't feel comfortable talking about that because what you're talking about is a man who's accused of assaulting a young lady. And the topic that we went directly to was the United Healthcare unaliveness of the CEO. So it was just,
and everyone was comfortable with that.
Everybody was fine with it. We had that conversation for a while.
Interesting.
But talking about Jay-Z and, you know, the trauma that this young lady experienced was like off limits.
That's interesting.
So that's number one. And I was like, okay, that's like a bullet point. Okay, this is where our culture's at. Another one was, and this is kind of maybe a comedy bit that I'm working on. I think you notice how we've got all these school shootings, and they really aren't helpful at all. And people don't like them. They're horrible. We just need these kids that get angry to go to a different location. You know, we need them to go to boardrooms. I think, and then things might change. We might get gun control if because these kids are going haywire and they're just doing it in the wrong place. Because we could get a lot of value from this horrible thing that's happening if they just did it in the boardroom.
If the violence was targeted.
Yeah. At people that might have there might be a positive consequence to it.
Yeah.
It's just a shame because those CEOs aren't blatantly bullying them or whatever experience they're having in these schools or at home that are creating the dysfunction. But we need to somehow legally give them a way to take their anger somewhere where it'd be useful.
Well, I mean, what you're really saying is you're recognizing that the kind of undifferentiated anger that bubbles up through a broken system is a kind of mischanneled response to that system, right?
Yeah.
And
it hurts a lot of people
and,
that are more innocent.
And I get the dark humor of like, maybe we just need to target this at the violence of the, I mean, I think obviously the solution is to reduce the violence, right?
Yeah, we need to reduce the violence.
Because, even high level targeted violence tends to like.
So you don't think what happens at the end of this late stage capitalism is some kind of violent revolution?
I think that is a big danger of what happens.
Because America's probably, the military now is, I don't think anybody, the Second Amendment is going to get you there.
The thing is, like, when I study the history of revolutions, the progress that are made around revolutions, violent revolutions, is in spite of the violence, not because of the violence.
Really?
Yeah, I do think the violence tends to create so many problems. But look, if violent revolutions helped, we'd be in a better place than we are right now. We've had a lot of violent revolutions in the last 200 to 300 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like the sort of sense that like the end of late stage capitalism is violent revolution is like, no, violent revolution has been going strong since the 1800s.
So why do we have a non-violent revolution?
Right. You know, like, I mean, I think we do see moments of real progress around non-violent revolution. Right? I think the development of the Indian state came about because that. I think the civil rights movement came around. So like, but it's hard and it's work.
Okay, in the last 5 minutes, what do we owe future generations? Compassion in future generations, a Buddhist contribution to an ethics of global interdependence. What do you think we owe them?
All right, so here's the thing. I don't think he even asked that. Like, that's the title of the question, but he never asks, what do we owe? He says, how do we get an ethic that helps us recognize that we owe something to future generations?
Well, in the beginning, he doesn't even say that. In the beginning, he says, hey, man, just let people continue to develop, and the problems that we experience now won't even be problems then.
Well, he says we don't know that that's the case, right? Like part of it.
Well, he says we don't know them. They
We
can't
don't
help
know.
us decide anything, and
They don't exist.
They don't exist. They don't have agency and determinacy right now.
And we can't have a
and there's no
relationship.
symmetry because they
Yeah.
can't communicate to us. We can't
We
communicate
can't have a
with them.
relationship of reciprocity.
So we don't even know if this is going to be a problem in the future. So why worry about it?
Right. There's a level at that. And then at the end, he basically says, compassion will help us recognize that relationship. But he never says, what do we owe them? Like he never is addressing what we owe them, right? He just is like, how do we get to a way that we understand that we owe them something?
I mean, we're not. It doesn't seem like right now we're leaving folks a better world than we were presented with. That seemed across the board. Whether you look at coral reefs, whether you look at the ocean, whether you look at the sky, whether you look at the land, it doesn't seem like we're leaving people a better land than we received.
We're not going to Star Trek.
Yeah,
we're not. That's not the direction we're going.
So. What I don't know. I think we do owe them something, but I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think we're going to do anything as a mass of people.
Yeah, and I think what he ultimately, if there is an answer to that, it's that we owe them our compassion
for the crap world we're going to give them,
and we
because they're going to suffer.
Yeah, we recognize that, and then we act accordingly. Right? We recognize the consequences of our actions. And we act accordingly, not to solve the problem. And that's where that problem predicament thing, I think, is. I don't think he articulates that as well as he could. But when I thought about it, I think it actually is very insightful. Because what he says, the distinction between a problem and a predicament is that a problem demands a solution. A predicament demands a resolution.
That's right.
And what does he mean by that? And I think that's part of the problem. It's like solution, like, what does that mean? I think what he means is, we need to figure out what we need to resolve ourselves to do within this situation to make things better, not to solve the problem.
Because you can't solve a problem. Because a predicament is a situation where there's competing ideas around the outcomes and the good.
Right.
And we're not going to get to where we can't all align on that.
Right.
So we have a predicament, which is what climate change is.
Right.
So we get there by finding something we can agree on.
Right. Right. Well, and understand the agreement to be through these networks of relationship, not through a system that defines it for everyone. That's the important of that. Remember that diversity and equity section that he has right toward the end, where he says we need to lean into these two values.
Uh-huh.
And it was interesting, especially in this anti-DEI
where he talked about
kind
separation and
right, and basically he says we need to lean into kind of doing what we can in our relationships to make them equitable, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
And then the second part of that is diversity, which is actually about, in what the way he's articulating, recognizing that we have different goods, we have different outcomes, we're all seeking different things, and that's okay. And we may need to operate in a system where we're not all lining up and going in the same direction, but we're attending to our relationships as best they can. Understanding the way we attend to that is going to look very different. The way you attend to your relationship with your daughter is going to be very different than your relationship with me and your relationship with the mayor of Austin.
But the value of your value within a social network is going to be the strength of all of those those relationships,
and how you can use those relationships to produce more good in the world.
More good in the world.
Yeah.
Speaking of producing more good in the world, what do you think we do after we're done with this? We're done with these 8 questions. Mm-hmm. What do you want to do next?
Well, we could go read another philosophy book. We could read a different kind of book.
Yeah.
I was looking at my shelf. It's a thick book.
It's
a really thick book. But
I like to choose books by their thickness.
Right. But it's not a philosophy book per se.
The same way I like to choose my queso.
And I think it gets at a lot because you often come back to these origin stories. Like, what were the migration to agriculture?
What's the book?
The book is called The Dawn of Everything.
Okay. What if the next time you brought over some books and we
just film looking at them and stuff?
We would film looking at the book and talk about the book and think about and choose our next book?
No.
No.
We each bring 5 books.
I got to come up with books?
You got to come up with 5 books. And I come up with 5 books.
How am I going to find philosophy books?
You're
You're going to get
All right.
You're going to get philosophy for dummies, Grant.
right, I'm looking at your shelf. I see Mindsight, Dare to Lead, Blink,
Brene Brown.
Brown.
Brene Brown. You
Yeah,
want some Malcolm Gladwell in here?
All of those are books we can have good philosophical conversations around. They're books about ideas, and that's all you need for good philosophy. They may not be making academic philosophical arguments.
It'd be better to read for me. I'd be less angry as
So,
I'm reading through the text.
Bring it, and we'll see you.
So we each bring 5 books, and we together
Just talk through them and decide.
decide what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
And maybe have some arguments so that we satiate the masses' desire for conflict.
We just need to stage the arguments.
Stage them?
Stage them.
What do you want to argue about? Let's stage one right now. What should we argue about?
I don't know.
Do you have anything? What, you can't even come up with an argument, Grant?
No,
That's right, because you're too chill.
I am far too chill.
You're way too chill, and you know what? Your chillness is harshing my extreme,
It is.
and that's not okay with
And
me.
yeah, I know. It's actually my strategy to defeat you.
I'll never be defeated. Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll pick 5 books each. We'll come together and discuss them and then land on one. Another thing I thought we could do would be to have one episode where we talk through all of these 8 questions and think through like what is this? What have I left with? Having like a philosophical discussion that was like a holistic thing of this book.
Like after that,
Like what do you mean?
maybe we can do that when we look at the 5 book.
Yeah, we can do it that day too, because
like-
we'll have 2 hours.
Yeah,
we
we
could do
can-
that.
yeah.
Just go through like a quick talk on each one of these questions. Like, how do I think now about, human flourishing, and how do I think about does reality have a ground, and just
Right.
like go through all.
Yeah, is reading this done anything for me except be like a nice exercise to hang out and get some good footage,
and hang out with you and have good talks.
which is a good in itself that I don't want to undervalue.
Yeah, it's enrichment. If I'm going to read more of this type of stuff, I probably need to do it more consistently, because I think the anger would reduce. There'd be a reduction in anger with more familiarity of this type of text. You know what I mean? Like doing it once a month or once every 2 months, I'm just like, oh, I have to learn it again, how to read, how laborious it is, as opposed to like, oh, it's this. I'm beginning to get, familiar with this, because I imagine you're familiar with this type of laborious reading.
Yeah, no, it's there's no question that like reading is a skill, and I've spent my life developing that skill.
Yeah, I haven't.
Right. And even if you're reading a lot,
Well, this is not reading, Grant.
but no, it is. It's reading.
No,
It is reading.
this is deciphering the most. Just I could find a sentence in here.
Which is what reading is. Rereading is
Like,
decoding.
but they're doing their best to make it the hardest to read something.
I think in some cases, yeah, but I think it's actually that they're often making technical arguments or complicated arguments that actually require a level of cognitive investment.
And context. Like you
And
kind of
context,
need to
yeah.
be in the context of the
That-
author and his world of like the people that he's read, and kind of
no,
knowing the people.
Absolutely. No,
I'm just going to pick a sentence at random.
Right.
And hope that it is
Go for it.
particularly challenging. Buddhist recognition and affirmation of the interdependence and karmically qualified interpenetration of all things ultimately involves recognizing and affirming the mutual non-obstruction of self and society, or more accurately stated, the mutual non-obstruction of the personal and the public as distinctive dimensions of human relationality.
Yeah.
The challenge there is, he says, or more accurately stated, and I still, you got that. You got that whole thing?
I know. I would actually have to go back and reread it and decipher it some.
Buddhist recognition and
And I mean, like, partly because I'm a reader, not a listener.
Right.
So I'd have to look at it on the page to decipher it. And so yeah, it's a very complex idea. in a complex sentence.
I think it enriches my life doing it.
There is a level at which some writers could probably, and I think this may be one writer or editors could benefit from saying, following the George Orwell school of thought in terms of writing and communication. How can I say this more in plain language?
Yeah.
Right?
I'll say this again. I'm sure I've said it in past
And
episodes.
that's the context.
I wish we could make this palatable. And maybe that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's
making this palatable for a lot of people, because I think there's benefit to sitting with these questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been enriched by it, but the masses aren't going to get there through reading this book. They're not going to read this book.
Right. And it's like any other technical discipline. There are things you can do when you operate at that technical language in terms of the complexity of ideas you can examine. But if that's the way you work when you're talking to a broader audience, you're going to lose them. Like, if I'm a physicist and I try to explain physics to you, if I'm a theoretical physicist, by writing all the equations I need to do, like, you're going to be lost.
You'll be lost.
Right? So why would I think that looking at all those equations is the best way to get it as the masses? Like, yeah. But this is a book that is...
It's for academics.
Well, this is a book that is really designed to be like a first or second year for academics. But
this is first or second year?
Yeah.
You heard that sentence? That's a fourth year sentence.
I know, isn't it? Well, you got to throw some fourth year sentences at first or second year people, so they develop the skills around it.
Yeah. Stephen M. Emanuel, I emailed him, and he emailed me back. Great guy. I couldn't get him to come on the show. I wish we could.
But did he? So he knows that you did a podcast.
Yeah,
Was he excited by it?
Yeah. He was like, I think I've emailed a handful of these authors.
That's awesome.
A lot of them have emailed me back and said, I think it's great that you're exposing this content to lay people.
Of course, yeah.
He's actually writing a book now based on Pixar movies, I think, philosophy and Pixar movies. And he offered to send one to me. So I thought about writing back and saying, hey, send that over, and maybe we'll add that to the next 5 we do and stick with Stephen M. Emanuel with our philosophical journey.
Yeah.
I'll just have to think, which was his question? He did one of them.
I think he did maybe the first one. I can't remember.
He did, oh my God, now he did How Much Is Enough?
Oh, he did that one, yeah.
He did How Much Is Enough?
Chapter 7?
Greed, Prosperity, and Economic Problems of Happiness, a Comparative Perspective, which is the one we did last.
Yeah, that had a lot of discussion of Adam Smith. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
cool.
Is there anything else you want to share? I think we've come to...
No, I think I got to go.
We're at 11:07. This has been Phil Phails at Philosophy Book Club with Grant Potts. That man is Grant Potts.
That man is Phil.
That's me. We've been talking about, oh my God, what do we owe future generations?
But we haven't been talking about that. We've been talking about a lot of other things today. So, sorry if what you really wanted was... read. It actually has a pretty good analysis of kind of like what the problems are philosophically. So just go read the book if that's what you wanted.
Read the book, buy the book. It's a great book. We really enjoy it. And keep joining us.
Yep.
Joining us. We're going to keep talking about philosophy and having fun, enriching our lives and hopefully enriching your lives. That's a wrap. Now we hug.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Forgot about the hug.
Yeah. That's the best part.